Hello and welcome to the Linux Spotlight. This show's dedicated to showing off the best thing about Linux, our community. This community is made up of developers, distro maintainers, YouTubers, and everyday users. Each one plays a vital role in our community. And the goal is to have a discussion with each individual about their journey into Linux and beyond. So join me now as we turn the spotlight on. Hello, I'm your host Rocco, and with me today, our special guest is none other than chzbacon. Cheese, how are you, brother?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I am excellent. See, I got a big cup of
Liquid Patience.
And we're ready to go, dude.
I've got my Linux-ridden mug here, so
Yep.
I'm ready to go too.
Nice. Well, look, most people will know your voice from podcasts like Linux Unplugged, the JB Friday streams, the extras. You've even appeared on Choose Linux, and they get to hear your voice. But maybe they don't know much about you. So tell us, who is this mysterious chzbacon guy?
At the end of the day, man, I'm just a regular dude that's into Linux just like everyone else that's been on this show, everyone else that's been on one of the Jupiter Broadcasting shows. I love Linux. I'm into it. I have a ton of other hobbies as well. So, I do some woodworking. I do play some music. But at the end of the day, I like this community because it's so different and because we have such a wide range of people that are into everything, man. I mean, I've met engineers. I've met people that work with satellites. I've met, just some of the most interesting people have come from this community, and I've been, graced to meet them. And so, for me, I'm just a normal dude that likes to talk about Linux. I guess I bugged Chris enough that he finally gave me a job. I can talk about Linux. So that's where I'm at now is doing this as a day job and loving every minute of it.
That is awesome. So do you still work for Linux Academy, right?
Yeah. So Jupiter Broadcasting was acquired by Linux Academy a little over a year ago, which to me I see is basically a service for our community. They don't ask us to change anything. They don't dictate to us how we do our shows or anything like that. It's more of a public service that they know, we enjoy what we do and we like to get the message out, and they want to help us do that. So yeah, I worked for Linux Academy, but under the Jupiter Broadcasting arm of Linux Academy. And so I work with the show. I'm on Linux Unplugged. I do a lot of the artwork for the shows. So whether that be an MP3 badge, or that's a Twitter graphic, or that's a motion graphic for the stream, I do a lot of that for the show.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I remember you saying that you worked for a college. So tell us about that.
I did. I worked for Lamar Institute of Technology, which is a little 2-year technical college here in the Beaumont, Texas area. And there I just basically did the same sort of work. I did a lot of photography there, did a lot of graphics there. So whenever they would have, different student appreciation days and they needed artwork for shirts, or they needed posters, or they needed anything like that, they would come to me. And so that's what I've done my entire life, really, is graphic design. Before that, I had worked at a newspaper for about 6 years. Had a really good time there. Got to do some magazine layout and some different publications. Weekly publication there. We were lucky enough that we got the National Newspaper Association Award there one year that I was working, and some of my designs got picked up from there. So
wow,
it was really, really cool. And then before that, I was at a television station. I worked at a television station for about 3 years, doing commercial production and promotions. Basically started the shift that no one wanted, which was you get there at 3:00 in the morning and you're the guy that types all the lower thirds that pop up under the stories and stuff. And then one day we were having problems with lower thirds, and I was like, well, let me just make some. So I started making some, and they were like, dude, why are you in here at 3 o'clock in the morning doing this? Why don't you just make graphics for us? So went into that, and then got scuttled off into commercial production. So basically going out to the used car dealerships and letting them yell at me for half a day so that I could get their, lowest price spiels in and stuff like that. And then I'd take them back and edit them and put graphics together for them and stuff like that. And before that, I was at a screen printing shop. So I worked at a t-shirt screen printing shop for about 3 or 4 years as well, which all of this now begins to add up. And
Right.
I'm old.
Yeah, but that's like an awesome, you did it in reverse, but that's an awesome progression if you go forward with that from the screen printing onto like a shift that nobody wants for a TV station, and then into commercials, and then that's an awesome, like, uplifting track.
Yeah, well, I had a great time doing it, and wouldn't change any of that for the world. So,
yep. Well, you mentioned that you have hobbies outside of Linux, woodworking and music. So, what kind of woodwork do you do?
Not very good woodwork. Basically. No, I mean, so I do a little bit of woodwork around the house. My wife will task me to build something. I built the 2 desks that we have, some shelves, some different things like that. My, I find that it's better to give a gift that kind of comes from the heart. So a lot of times if I'm going to a housewarming party or Christmas or something like that, I'll make something. Whether that be something just to put your change in or a coat rack or whatever,
Right.
and give those out as gifts. I enjoy that. There's something really therapeutic. I know this sounds weird, but there's something really therapeutic about sanding and painting that just can kind of absolve your mind from any of the other worries. And, you're just, so there's something that's really therapeutic about woodworking that I enjoy a lot.
Well, I can't say that I enjoy the same, but I do need a desk. So anytime you want to make me a desk, no, I'm just kidding. What about the music?
Yeah, so played in a band in high school. Played 4 years in the actual high school band on the drum line, and then played a little garage punk rock band. Played guitar for that band, and then moving forward a few years after I'd gone to college and come back. I got together and played with some local musicians here, and I haven't really played much as of recent, I'd say in the last couple of years, but I still pick up the guitar and play around on it. I play guitar and bass and ukulele, and basically it's my wife's ukulele that I just hijack from her sometimes. And even have been known to spin a little wax and do some turntable stuff.
Nice. You're like an all-around guy, dude.
Well,
you're into everything.
Thank you.
Well, look, your places that you work, JB, Linux Academy, they all support Linux.
Absolutely.
But what about your local friends, family? Are they receptive to Linux?
No. I would say for the
That's a good answer.
For the most part, no. They're not receptive to it, right? It's interesting whenever I have conversations with them about what I do and they ask what Linux is, and then I basically tell them that you're surrounded by it every day and you really don't even know that you're surrounded by it every day. But I never really have gotten to the point where I try to push someone onto Linux. I don't try to evangelize it per se. If someone hears the word and they're interested in it, then they know that I'm generally the guy to come to talk about it. So when I was working at the college, there were a couple of younger folks that were getting into the IT department, and they had asked me, like, what distribution should I run? And I was like, well, you really need to just kind of check them all out and see which ones you like, because they all are a little bit different. And at the end of the day, it comes down to a visual thing for a lot of people. So their initial impression of what that distribution is, what it looks like, seems to be what hooks them on that distribution. So this one kid, Roy, that I worked with at the college, I told him, I said, well, check out Ubuntu, check out Fedora, check out Manjaro. And then he came back to me and he was like, you know what, man, I really like Manjaro. I was like, well, great, dude. Then, you know, now go explore different desktop environments, right? Because I just pushed him into XFCE version of Manjaro. And so now he's just this huge fan of KDE, and, he runs his Manjaro box. And he administers a lot of the Cisco networking gear there at the college. But I don't generally try to push it off on anyone, and I don't generally try to evangelize it. But if people come to me and they're curious about it, I'm more than willing to kind of lead them down that road. I had previously, which it's kind of sad now that it's stopped, but we had a local computer club meetup, which was mainly just a bunch of people running Windows, and they actually would carve out 15 minutes at the end of these monthly meetings to let me talk about Linux. So, and this is back in the day when Ubuntu was shipping their disk out for free, and you could get one disk, no problem, shipped to your house of server and desktop. But you would have to inquire if you wanted more disks. So I would have to inquire basically every new release that I needed 30 copies of each, right? And I would go to my local computer club and I would just give these discs out. And from that, I would say, the 30 or so people that would meet there every month, I'd say probably 5 to 7 of them actually got into Linux and started using it on a daily basis. So, I'm more than willing to talk about it, but I don't necessarily go out and, force it down someone's throat either.
Well, that's actually a higher number than I would have expected, to be honest with you. But, you said about evangelizing it and not evangelizing it. And right now there's a big push in the Linux community world for pushing Linux, having better marketing. And I've been in that same push, but you're right. You can't, I talked about it on the previous Linux Spotlight with Joe, that people don't change their minds because you're jamming it down their throat. And the best thing is to present it to them when it's there and let them make the choice. Jamming it down somebody's throat's like, it's like a used car salesman. And
Absolutely.
Nobody wants to hear that.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that the same thing can be said sometimes about religion. If you're really strong and you're really pushy about it, people are going to back off of that, right? They're going to kind of maybe even resent you for it. So just being that person that they can come to if they are curious about Linux, I think has kind of been the way that I've always approached it.
Right. Well, before we deep dive into Linux, let's go back to the beginning of your computer days and talk about what was the first computer you touched.
It was an Apple IIe in elementary school. It was the first computer that I touched. It was one of those things where we were a small school district, so we only had like four or five of those machines, and it would be a class of 15 or 20 kids. You didn't get to spend much time on them. So I was fortunate enough that my father was an engineer. He was a draftsman, and along comes technology with the old school digitizers that people may remember, with the old school pucks and stuff like that. And my dad had picked up a 386 machine with the Math coprocessor, and it was this giant beige box, and one of the guys that he worked with, a younger guy, was like, well, here, you might like this, and gave my dad a copy of Doom, right? And then instantly got hooked. I was like, this is cool. Like, you can make stuff. Yes, I want this. And then that slowly evolved into and I can even remember like my early years of messing with Linux and computing, that I'd gone to the Walmart. And back then I think it was PC Magazine, when there were still magazine racks in stores, they would have disc, and there was a copy of OS2 on a disc. And I brought that home and I tried to install it on the 386 and just totally hosed my dad's machine. And he was furious. Sorry, Dad. He was so angry. And of course, I didn't back anything up, right? Like any of the work
Who
that he
does
had
that?
done for work, so he lost some stuff and he was very agitated with me. So it didn't take long for me to figure out how to fix it. And then that sent me down, my own path of kind of working on his computer. And then he realized that it might be safer if he just bought me my own. So he did. He bought me a compact Presario 486, which, man, that's been so many years ago. I think it had a 2X CD-ROM on it back in the day.
Yep.
US Robotics modem. Well, actually, I believe so. The original modem in it was, I think maybe it was a 14.4 or something like that. And I used that to get connected to my friends. So we would connect and then we would be able to chat with each other, right? And all the AT commands and all that stuff, setting up the dialer and all that. And then that sent me down the path of BBSs. And so I kind of got into BBSs and stuff. And then, of course, that sends you down the path of you need a new modem, right? So you upgrade to a 19, to a 28, to a 56K, and just kind of went down that path. And, now I'm surrounded by computers that I don't have enough arms to use all of them. But that's kind of where I got my start with computing.
So you mentioned about the first computer you used. How old were you when you first heard Linux?
I was probably somewhere between 14 and 15 years old. Shortly after getting set up and doing the BBS stuff, and then along comes the internet. And I was a super fan of, in the BBS days, FidoNet, if anyone remembers that, where basically you could chat across BBSs, right? These BBS would be connected to each other. So it was kind of this expansive chat room. It sent me down the path of my first provider, which was IH2000, Internet Highway 2000. And I didn't do the AOL or anything like that. And I got into that, and then I got into IRC. Ended up on FNet, like a bunch of us did back then. And that just kind of sent me down the path of, well, what else is there? And then I had some friends that were like, dude, you need to check out Linux. A couple of buddies that I had gone to school with was like, you really need to kind of get into Linux and check it out. I think you'd like it. And so I did, tinker with it a little bit then. It wasn't for me at the time because it was just so, coming even from like a Windows 95 type machine, it was so ugly. The desktop was so ugly. And it was such a struggle to get it configured that I didn't want to have my machine down long enough to configure it to be able to get back on the internet to do these things. And of course, I couldn't afford another hard drive because hard drives were like gold back then.
Right.
So, I just kind of pushed it off to the side. And then whenever I went to the Art Institute, my roommate, Jay, was running Slackware. And I'd had I think it was an AMD K6, like 350 megahertz tower. And I was doing some video editing and stuff on that back in the day, which, please, no one ever do that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not fun. And then, he was like, well, hey, you ought to check out Slackware. And at this time, I still had like an old 20 gig hard drive kicking around. So I threw it in there and I started, tinkering with Slackware. And of course, like many of us, the video card was not supported out of the box. Right. And my roommate's like, because he's to this day, I mean, he's one of the greatest guys. He's a huge BSD guy. He's a huge Linux guy. He still runs Slackware to this day. He's like, look, man, we'll get it figured out. This is the problem. It's your video card. Let me do some research. I'll find you a card that works. So I got a Trident 4 megabyte video card that would work, because this was during the AGP, ISA, PCI kind of, no one knew where video cards were going to go sort of thing.
Yep.
So it was like the worst video card possible. But I got into it. And then with that, I was able to get a desktop up and running. And I started asking him, which first desktop I used was XFC. And then I started asking him, I was like, dude, there's got to be there's got to be something better. It's like, I don't want to compile all of the things. Like, I get it, and at the time we had two lines, two phone lines in our apartment. So each one of us could have a dedicated line. Well, we decided to bond them together to make our own ISDN line so that we could pull down packages and compile a lot quicker, and I was like, there's got to be something else out there that I can check out. And so on a visit to a Comp USA, which I don't even know if those are around anymore.
They're not around anymore, but yeah, I had them.
Yeah. So whenever you would walk in the Comp USA door, they would have these big metal wire bins just full of like discount software, like the worst games no one ever would ever want to play. They were always full of Linux. And it was like, it was crazy, man. There would be like a box set. So my first, the first distro that I bought, at the time, I bought a copy of Slackware, which is on like 900 CDs. And then I bought myself a copy of SUSE 5.3, which was the first boxed copy of Linux that I had that came with a manual, which I still actually miss to this day. I love having a physical manual in front of me. But I got into SUSE and started messing around with SUSE. Loved it. It was still a little clunky, but then I started realizing, and this is at the same time that I was going to the Art Institute, that I could really customize it and dial it in to make it what I wanted, right? To really design a desktop experience for myself. And I think a lot of us still get off on that now. We can just overly customize and spend days and days and days and days customizing it, only to the next week drop it all and go to something else. So
that's the fun of it, man.
That is the fun of it, man. And I love that. I love that about Linux. So that's really where I started it. My first copy was Slackware. And man, I don't remember. I want to say it was Slackware that my friends, whenever I was really younger, they were trying to get me to use as well. But my first purchase copy was Slackware and SUSE.
Well, what was the best thing and the worst thing about, Slackware? Like, you had, obviously it wasn't easy to do a whole lot of stuff, but if you had to tell somebody your story and you wanted to convey the best thing about Linux then and the worst thing about Linux then, what would it have been?
The best thing about Linux then, and I still think it's true to this day, is kind of the exploration of Linux and explicitive messing it all up, right? And then coming back and learning why you messed it all up and how to fix it. So I would say that, I loved that about Linux at that time. The one thing that I really disliked about Linux at that time is it's kind of twofold. Documentation wasn't great. So if you didn't get a manual, well, good luck, because you're on mailing lists and forums trying to search out your answers. And the second part of that was, if you were trying to search out your answers, the community was really, really brutal, right? They're just like, you might as well just take that computer, throw it in the dumpster and light it on fire and walk away. Like, there was no help. I mean, you kind of had to dig for it. It was a little bit more difficult then.
Yeah, I would say it was definitely a little bit more difficult then. Now, you try these distributions. Do you switch right away, or do you go back to Windows?
I did. Well, so on my desktop that I had when I was living there with my roommate in Houston, I had 2 disks. And I would actually physically unplug and plug in another disk, because at the time I was going to the Art Institute and I had to basically use Windows. They used Macs there at the school, which I couldn't afford. And you could also use Adobe Premiere and stuff in Windows. So I would basically use Linux for all of my personal stuff and then switch back over to Windows for my schoolwork, or to maybe design some graphics that I would then take off of that machine on a zip disk and move that over to the Linux side, which getting a parallel connected zip drive on your Linux machine at that time was kind of difficult. And then come along the Jazz disk that are a whole 1 gigabyte of storage, which never was a fan of, and had very many projects ruined by the click of death. from those jazz discs. So, but yeah, that's where that went.
Well, do you still use Windows or Mac in any way?
I do. I use every operating system. I'm kind of a technophile and just a nerd in general. So, I do have and recently just flashed the NVMe in my desktop over to Ubuntu, but I still have actually an SSD here on my shelf that's loaded with Windows 10 that I do some gaming on every now and then. In fact, I think you and I have played a couple of games there.
Yep.
And then kind of the best of both worlds for me right now is Mac OS when it comes to work, because I get the support of the Adobe Suite stuff. And I also use the Affinity products, so Affinity Designer and stuff like that. Which please, if you're listening, Seraph, please make all of the Affinity products work under Linux. I will pay you.
That's what they're afraid you won't do.
Yeah, probably so. But no, so the way that I feel about that is that you should really, for all of those real hardline Linux users out there, I would say to you, you should use every operating system simply because it makes you more well-rounded. Whenever you sit, let's say if you work in IT and Sally says that her printer's not working on the latest Windows 10 install, you still need to be able to migrate and navigate through that operating system to get it working. So I think it just makes you more well-rounded as a computer user to kind of use everything that's available to you, use all of the tools. And I don't particularly like Windows, right? I will literally only fire it up to play games, and then it gets turned off. So I don't do any design work on Windows. I do like that Apple kind of has that best of both worlds where I can have a terminal and I can get into, doing very similar tasks. And a lot of the Linux work that I do is through a terminal. So I feel a little more at home on Mac OS. It's the lesser of two evils, I guess some might say, but I think it's important that everyone uses kind of everything that's available to them as far as operating systems go.
Well, I feel the same way about Windows because I only boot up into it to play certain games that won't run on Linux, and then it goes off and I'm back on the Linux machine. But I think it's you said it'd be more well-rounded. It's also to the point where there are people who will get upset that you're using a certain operating system, and I think that's terrible for the fact that the whole thing is about being a good community. And we sit here and we say we want to be a good community, and then when somebody comes along and says, "Oh, I use Windows half the time," we'll make fun of them, or well, not me particularly, but I'm saying you hear people do this, and it's like, this is so wrong. You use the best tool for the job.
Absolutely.
So if Windows for you is the best tool for the job, then use it. If Linux is the best tool, that's great. I'm happy that there's one more Linux user. Use it, but at the end of the day, you have to decide that, not me.
That's right. I mean, if you're let's say cutting pipe to install in a project, it's probably better to use a pipe cutter than it is a hammer. They will
Yes.
They will both get the job done, right? You can use a hammer and smash it and bend it over your knee until it breaks, but it's probably better just to use the pipe cutter.
It probably is. So you're on programs like Choose Linux, so I know, I listen to the podcast you're on, so I know the answer to this question, but on your machines, are you a distro hopper?
Yes, I would say, because obviously we're always testing out the latest distros as they kind of roll out. And so, in fact, I bought an older ThinkPad recently just for that reason alone. I've generally used hand-me-down computers. Like I'll buy my wife a machine, and then whenever it gets long in the tooth, she'll give it to me, and then I'll load it with Linux, and then I'll mess around with it. So this was the first machine that I bought with just dedicated to kind of distro hopping. And I like to, I do a lot of work with single board computers and stuff. So I've tried a ton of different available distributions for these single board computers. And I like seeing what else is out there. I am at the root of it. I feel like I align more with Debian. I'm more comfortable with a Debian environment. So whether that be Debian Raw or Ubuntu base or some derivative thereof, I just feel more comfortable in that environment. But I really do like to jump around and just see what else is out there and appreciate the hard work that others put into it. I mean, even if you don't particularly like the distribution, um, someone put their heart and soul into making it, and I think that we should respect that.
Agreed. Going back to what you had said before about customizing your system taking longer, that's the whole draw of distro hopping, is to download the latest whatever and start setting it up and seeing how it works when you change this or you change that. I did get to a point where on my main machine I don't distro hop. I have a test machine, just like you had said about the ThinkPad. I have a desktop test machine that I will try all of the new hotness out. But on the main machine, I think the idea of setting it up is great, and I love that. But I don't want to have to set it up right before a Linux Spotlight interview. So.
Precisely, and that's why I went with Ubuntu on my desktop. I worked with Ubuntu Mate. I tested it out, which apparently still to this day, Linux has an issue with video cards. So my NVIDIA 1060 doesn't like to play well with Linux at all. So I found that, and I don't know if it was just my installation process, but on Ubuntu Mate, that it was was having more problems. I was having more frame drops and those sorts of things whenever I try to play games. So I love to play Counter-Strike. I love these FPS games. And I was getting, 90 to 100 frames a second. And then just switching over to 1910 Ubuntu base, I was getting like 200 frames a second. I need to revisit that and find out why that is.
Yeah.
But I've also told myself that maybe just to avoid some of the stress that comes along with these tests is that I need to get a proper piece of hardware for that. So I was actually looking at the RX 580 as a replacement for the 1060, just to have a little bit better compatibility when it comes to Linux and gaming.
Well, I think if you're the type of person that doesn't need the absolute highest frame rates, AMD is probably the way to go if you're a distro hopper. It's just simple as that, because it's just going to work. Right. If you're somebody like, I don't know, like when I play a game, I want to play it at the highest setting available and as smooth as it can be. So I'll usually go for the highest possible card I can get, but that doesn't go well with distro hopping. No. Just saying.
Generally doesn't. And especially whenever it seems like when you get the latest tech, it seems to take, a couple of years, at least a year for it to get up to speed, to be comparable under Linux, I feel.
That's true even under NVIDIA or AMD. So,
yeah, touche.
So what Linux distro did you finally land on that you can say this is my distro of choice or desktop environment of choice?
I feel like it was Ubuntu. After my stint with SUSE in the early days, I found Debian and really got into that, and then whenever I got back to the area from school, that's kind of the same time I started getting into the local computer club. Also the same time that Ubuntu started shipping disks. And there really is no better way to have someone try out your product than for them to ship you a free disk. So I feel more at home on Ubuntu. But I really do like what others are doing. So I really do like the Arch project. I really do like Manjaro. I really do like some of these other distributions that take a slightly different approach. But I feel more at home on an Ubuntu machine generally.
And what desktop environment do you prefer?
That's a difficult one, man.
I know it is.
For me, it's really been a GNOME thing. because that's generally just what ships out of the box with Ubuntu. But I love XFCE, which, fun tip. I just actually learned this week that XFCE is based on CDE, which was developed for Unix essentially. And it was the common desktop environment is what it stood for. And then that was spun off whenever it was open sourced or given away. I think in like 2002 or something like that, it was given away. And then a lot of work started going into XFCE. I really like the minimalist aspect of XFCE, so I use that a lot. I've tried i3 and some of the tiling Windows managers. It's not particularly great for my workflow, I feel. I feel like it's perfect for someone that is editing comps and coding all day long, right? And they're just their fingers never want to leave the keyboard, and so you're just jumping around. And I understand how useful that can be, especially if like I said, you're someone that codes and works in the terminal all day long. I could see how that would be a huge benefit to someone like that. But for me, it's really been a blend of GNOME and XFCE.
Very nice. Well, let's talk about, we had mentioned Jupiter Broadcasting before. Let's talk about your podcasting stuff here. Did you get involved with Jupiter Broadcasting through Linux Academy, or how'd that work out?
So I was, for the longest time, I was a fan of, back in the day, Hack 5. This was way earlier, before Revision 3 had bought them and stuff. It was probably the first 2 or 3 seasons. And of course, there's a lot of Linux talk in that group, which sent me down the path of trying to discover other podcasters and people doing, utilizing Linux and talking about Linux, which sent me to the Jupiter Broadcasting IRC channel. I wasn't one of these guys, I'm still not one of those guys that programs. But I, reached out to Chris and I was like, hey man, I could probably help you with some graphics or some logos or let me see what I can do. And so for, probably like 8 to 10 years, I just hung out there in the IRC and Chris would throw me, hey man, can you help me with this graphic? Can you make a wireframe frame for this show? Or so like the original Unfiltered logo, I'd done that. Some of the other shows, Stoked, and some of the shows that aren't even around anymore, I did a lot of graphics for him for that, just all pro bono, just to give back to the community in the way that I could. So it kind of started there, and then over time, I kind of drifted away from Jupiter Broadcasting to get involved in some other projects, and eventually came back because it felt like home, and started chatting there again, and it just, one thing led to another, and it kind of spiraled. And I was talking with Angela one day and I said, hey, what would it take for me to work with you guys? And this was shortly after the acquisition had happened, and I was like, what would I need to do to kind of get in and get on board with you guys? I'd love to do this full time. And so I think they knew the type of work and the passion that I had for it, and kind of the understanding that I had for the Linux side of it as well. That it was, we just aligned really well.
Right.
And so whenever the opportunity came up that they needed someone just to handle the Jupiter Broadcasting graphics, I raised my hand and I said, me. And Angela kind of had written up some stuff and a proposal for that to happen. And Chris, I think he always enjoys when someone from the community kind of comes into the fold. So, I think he was on board from the initial, idea of it. And one thing led to another, and now I'm here working with Linux Academy and Jupiter Broadcasting, and couldn't be happier. And while, most companies give you great benefits and those sorts of things and health benefits, I'm a nerd. And the biggest benefit that I thought was, do I get an account at Linux Academy? Like, do I get a free account? And they were like, well, yeah, you get a free account. I was like, well, dude, sign me up. I'm in. I don't need a 401k. I got free Linux studies, man.
Well, you mentioned about the podcasting thing and the original ones you listened to, but for many people, JB is like the introduction into Linux. It's like the first podcast that they listen to about Linux, and it's grown into something pretty awesome with more shows than anybody has time to listen to.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is we always try to produce shows that we always really take to heart what our community wants and what our audience would like to listen to, and how we can potentially, gain more viewership and gain and bring more new people into Linux. Or, you'll see, BSD, BSD now. It's one of those shows where it's not really a Linux show, right? But people kind of fall in line with it because there might be a few people that are really into Linux or get into Linux and then wonder what this BSD thing is. So we kind of give them an avenue to go that route. And one of the latest shows that we've launched, the Linux Headline Show, which it really has been a show that Chris himself and the network have really struggled to kind of bring to light. And I would say that started back in the Tech Talk Today days with Jupiter Broadcasting, because it was a really hard show to do every day by yourself.
Yep.
And source everything and do everything by yourself. It's difficult to do that. And I have admiration for anyone that can solo work a full-time job and then come home and do a daily show about Linux. I have full admiration for that person. But we realize that now, since we've been given this opportunity, that we can have so many Linux nerds under one roof, that we're all of us, and like I said before, I used to work for a newspaper, so, and just kind of in for a television station. So I'm a news hound in general, right? So I'm always reading the latest Linux news and stories. Everyone on the team is, right? And so we talked about it and we said, let's try it again, but let's not try an hour-long show. Let's not try half-hour show. Let's give just Linux headlines without our take on it. Let's just basically give you the hottest Linux headlines that together as a team we've all sourced for the day, and give those to you in under 3 minutes. And so that's exactly what we're doing with that show. It seems to be going really well. People appreciate that show. We're working on getting it into the lady tubes. I don't want to say the other word, because if we say the other word, it might fire off people's lady tubes. So, but we're trying to kind of get it in avenues that wouldn't have really been a thing even 5 years ago. So that's one of the shows. It's one of our latest shows, but one that the whole team is really proud of, and that we're all really pushing forward and putting a lot of work and a lot of effort into.
Well, that's the thing. That is a lot of work, and it may be measured out among many people, but just, aggregating all of the headlines themselves and digesting them enough to put them out in an intelligent way is a ton of work.
Oh,
so, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and I can't tell you how many times that we're sitting, chatting in our team chat, and someone's like, "How do you pronounce this name?" And I mean, we all know that Chris is not really good at pronouncing names anyway, or words in general sometimes. But so we'll have to actually like dissect it and say, okay, this is how you pronounce this name, So, but we always try to, with that particular show, just give the listener the information. We don't try to put our spin on it or even deep dive into it. This is what it is, take it for its worth. It doesn't mean that we won't take that story later on in a following week or following show and kind of deep dive into it. And that's generally what happens.
Right.
But we've had a lot of fun with that show. It's been a lot of work. And I hope that people enjoy what it goes into. And obviously one of the things is we wanted to keep it a super short format so that someone, could listen on their lady tube while they were brushing their teeth or shaving in the morning, right? We didn't want it to be something that you had to devote a lot of time to. And like you mentioned, we're producing so many shows now that it's hard for people to digest all of the shows that we produce within a week. And then now with the extra stuff that we're doing, where one-offs get thrown into there, and it's kind of it's a lot. It is a lot for people, and so that was one of our goals with this particular show, is to make it short, easy to digest, and get on with your day.
Yep, it's definitely a lot. There are times where I'm listening to podcasts, like I'll be listening to the last of a segment of Linux Unplugged, and then there's a new one that pops in because I'm a little behind. So, if you had, like, I'm going to put you on the hot seat here, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a favorite show on JB?
Man, that's pretty difficult. I like all of our shows. If it was probably be a toss up between Linux Unplugged and User Error, because User Error is very disconnected from a lot of the other shows that we do, and those three guys are just hilarious. Like whenever they get on about, this latest episode when Popey's talking about how he uses a hammer and he closes his eyes anytime he goes to nail something into the wall. Like I get a mental image of this happening, so I really, really love that show. And then Linux Unplugged has always been one of those ones that, even when I wasn't working for JB, that show would start at 2:00, Seattle time. And that means I would be rushing home, trying to get into the tail end of the show to jump in on the mumble and say a couple of words. There would even be times that I'm like texting Chris, like, dude, I'm almost home. I'm turning down. Just give me 5 minutes, dude. I will be right there. Just to jump on the mumble and be part of that. So I really like Linux Unplugged. I like kind of the takes that we have on that, and what we strive to do there, which is very similar to what you do. We want to build a community. We don't want to tear down a community. So there's not often where we're just beating up on somebody. We may rib a project a little bit or something like that, but we're not out there being that person to say
that guy.
Yeah, we're not, and we all know who those types of people are, right? And sometimes their stuff is loaded with clickbaity stuff, and we don't try to be that. We really try to differentiate ourselves from that kind of atmosphere. So I appreciate that show for that.
Yep. Well, I love the shows that you mentioned, User Error and Linux Unplugged, but I have to say that I really enjoy the Choose Linux show. And you were on there recently and you added so much to the episode. It was an awesome show, and if you haven't seen it, you need to go back and listen to this episode. And you talked about everything, including single boards and pies and everything. So I take it you're into that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's cool, dude. It's like a little baby. It's like a little baby Linux computer. Like, who doesn't? It's cute. They're inexpensive, and they run Linux. Like, who wouldn't like that, right? Like, so when it comes down to those sorts of things, I'm all about it. I was in on the first Pi, which I ended up donating or giving away to my boss's kid that was starting to get into computing and stuff. And I said, well, here, take this home. Here's an SD card, an old mouse and keyboard, an HDMI cable, an old phone charger, and just plug it up to your TV. And now that kid is on his Pi 4. He's moved on up from the weak little original Pi to the Pi 4. So
you got him hooked.
I did, and I love that. I love that. And it's also sent me down the path of, you don't really have in today's machines the ability to work with general purpose input outputs sort of stuff, right? And so to me, that's kind of a throwback to before I was really even into computing. And so it's given me an opportunity to just work on other dinky little projects and stuff. And so I think it's a great entry point for someone if all they have, they don't have the opportunity to have multiple machines. If all they have is their laptop, which let's say they have to run Windows on or Mac OS on to get a certain thing done. This gives them an avenue to take a single board computer and flash it with Linux and kind of deep dive and get some experience with it. While it might not be the best experience ever because of its limitations, it gives them somewhere to start. And
Yeah.
so currently right now I have like 6 or 7 single board computers. 2 of them running, one of them runs Shinobi, which basically just takes streams from RTSP streams from security cameras and feeds it into a nice little interface. Um, and then the other one I'm running Open Media Vault. I believe it's Open Media Vault. But I'm running that and just to kind of play around with it, and it's super cool. And that machine actually has one purpose. It serves up ISOs. I know a lot of people are saying, "Oh yeah, you use your torrent client for ISOs." No, I legitimately use my torrent client for ISOs. So right now I'm seeding the Ubuntu Mate, the latest one. I'm seeding Debian 9, Debian 10 ISOs on it. And that's another way that, you can use one of these machines that really won't cost you anything in power
Right.
to give back to the community. So I think I'm up to some sort of crazy ratio number now with those ISOs. I love doing that sort of stuff. So I'm just a tinkerer when it comes to those types of things.
I see that. Well, you recently did an interview on a show. It was actually included in the JB Extras, Brunch with Brent. And you gave it was a whole show and him interviewing you, and you talked about your life and everything else, but you also talked about pies and everything. And I just never found anyway, that's a great interview. People should go listen to that. We'll leave a link for that. But I just never found a use case for me personally that I would use a pie for. I mean, I think they're great. I think it's awesome that it's available. I just don't have anything I don't think I would use it for.
Well, and I think the way to rationalize it is if you have a project or something you would like to do on a Linux computer, but you don't want to leave a power hungry tower running all the time to do this. And for most cases, let's say even if that's getting into Docker, right? And Docker Compose, which is just mind blowing. And within the last couple of years, Alex from self-hosted has really got me onto Docker. He's like, dude, you need to check this out. And then finally, like just drilling it through my head. But that's where I originally tried Docker on, right? Is I had a Pi 3 and so I set it up, and it's one of those things where, all right, dude, if I mess it up, if I just totally bork the entire thing, that's cool. Just pull the SD card out, reflash it, and I'm good to go again. So I think it really comes down to finding a use case where you could use it. So if you do have security cameras around your house and you want an interface where you can plug it up to the TV, you can plug it generally on some of these others. I don't know about the Pi 4, but with some of these other single board computers, you can power it off the USB port on your television, right? So then you can monitor your security cameras right there on your television just by switching the input source.
Right.
So I think that there's, find a problem that you have or something that you would like to tackle that you don't want to spend a ton of computing power and a ton of electricity on, and then use a single board computer for that.
I will have to definitely put that in the forefront of my mind in the future to see if that's something that I could do. But like I said, as of right now, I just don't have anything that I would need it for, or at least that I know of yet.
Right. And that's when it comes down. That's what it comes down to, man. You will find something one day, and you'll be like, that's perfect. For the longest time, whenever I was at the university, I had a Pi set up here that I would SSH into, and I had tmux running on, so I could disconnect and reconnect to my terminal. I had IRSSI, which turned into, which I eventually started using WeChat. I had like CalCurse and TTY clock and Ncurse's version of a Twitter client. And I would log in and have basically a to-do, I think it was called to-do. Anyway, just a slew of Ncurse's applications that was like my desktop away from home. Granted, it was all in a terminal, but I could still do a lot of the same things that I could do on a desktop through that terminal One problem with that is my internet connection isn't always the best. So it's really frustrating when you have to call your wife and you're like, babe, can you go cycle the Raspberry Pi? You mean cycle? And so after the first couple of times, she was like, yeah, I'll turn it off and on again for you. No problem. So, I mean, that was a use case for me, right? Where I didn't want to connect or have an IRC client on my work machine or anything like that. But hey, I could use PuTTY on a flash drive and connect to this single board computer at home.
Someday, and I'll come back to you and I'll say, it was you that started this. All right. So do you have a workflow that you use, whether that be a keyboard rather than mouse workflow, or even if that's like a set of software that you have to use every day?
Well, I mean, for me, my day-to-day stuff is done on a Mac, on a MacBook Pro. So, my suite is the Adobe suite, and I use the Serif products too. So, but I bounce back and forth between them. Software that generally gets installed on my Linux machines out of the gate is Telegram, Quassel, which I use now. I rely heavily on the terminal. So, I like old school terminal. I don't like Termux or the tilde Wake or whatever. I'm just, give me an icon to click on and open up a terminal. It's cool that we support tabs now. That's rad. But I don't really have a particular set of applications that I just have to use. I'm not swayed by one music player or another, or one video editor or another, or even one video player or another. I'm not really jaded if the application's Electron or not. As long as it does what I need it to do, then I'm fine with using it.
Some people are jaded about Electron apps.
Absolutely they are. Absolutely they are.
I can't believe, seriously, the amount of whatever you want to call it gets raised. The hair gets raised and the words just come out. It's an Electron app. And I don't understand that. Like, I don't understand. Like, you may not particularly care for a certain app or a certain program or a set of building things like Electron. But to be so against it, I just don't understand that at all.
Yeah, well, I feel that I'm just fortunate to have that software, right? Like, if we didn't have Electron, would we not even have that application? And then would we be even more irate because we didn't have that application?
It's only an Electron app. That's the one thing you hear. Like, this software works. Well, that's just an Electron app. I don't know. I'm able to use that software. I don't really care if it's an Electron app.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you had mentioned Serif being one of the programs that you would want to come to Linux. Are there any more that are that big of a deal that you'd say doesn't run on Linux now, but I wish it did?
I mean, I would love to see the Adobe suite run on Linux. I think, like a lot of people that have to use the Adobe suite for their job, it is frustrating that they've gone to this subscription type thing, and I just want to own a disk, or a flash drive, and just let me install it, and I'll buy your keys or whatever. It would be great. And I know that there are ways to get that working under Wine and stuff like that, but I'd love to see the Adobe suite eventually make it there. I think that there is more drive for the Serif line of products because they're really trying to fill that void that I feel like Adobe has left whenever they abandoned the outright purchase of software. So, I mean, you can get a great, wonderful vector illustration program for $50. It's a no-brainer. If we could bring that to Linux, and I've read through their forums, and there are some workarounds to get it running. In fact, I think I don't remember who it was. It might have been Q5Sys. Might have been Eric Adams. I don't remember. But we were talking about it, and there's like, oh, well, you can get it. Yeah, you can get it working. The one caveat, the one issue though, is that you can't save files.
That's not working, dude.
Yeah, that's a serious issue,
that's
right?
That's a serious problem.
That's a problem. like I can't use the software if I can't save the file. Like you're killing me. When I'm supposed to take like a screenshot or something and then I've worked in a vector application, but I'm taking a bitmap screenshot. Like, no, that's not going to work for me. So I would love to see some professional tools like that come to Linux. Not to say that there aren't some out there. Inkscape is a solid application. Never really been a big fan of GIMP. Krita is pretty cool. Another one that gets very little recognition is Scribus. Scribus is a pagination program, much like InDesign. So, I mean, there are good applications out there, and a lot of them have come leaps and bounds recently. I think within the last 2 to 3 years, GIMP has finally started supporting CMYK color modes. So if you are doing print publications, you really want to use a CMYK color space as compared to an RGB color space. So a lot of the things that professionals would need to get their work done are eventually coming to Linux, and they're being worked on. I wish I could contribute more to that, but again, I'm not the programmer. I'm not the guy that's going to write that. And I think one of the reasons that I don't particularly like GIMP is, and I know that there are ways that you can customize it to resemble Photoshop and those other things, but I feel like a lot of time, and this is just with Linux users and Linux programmers in general, is that they don't do a lot of work with the UI and the UX, so the user interface and the user experience.
Right.
And that's one thing that I really appreciate about what the Elementary team has done. Those guys are working extremely hard to bring a beautiful desktop to the Linux community. And I use Elementary as well. So, and I'm full disclosure, I support them. I give them a Patreon donation. So, and that's because I appreciate the work that they do and appreciate the dedication that they have. When I look at their Twitter and they're knocking Apple for, a 3-pixel misplacement of a button, and I'm like, dude, any guy that's noticing that and is doing their own desktop deserves my attention and deserves for me to give them a few bucks.
Well, you mentioned UI and UX, and I think it was the brunch with Brent that you were talking about this, and I loved listening to it because you were talking about things being out of place and themes that just weren't right, and like the older themes that you would have. And I have been saying, people make fun of me because they always say that 1 pixel's off with me, but this is stuff that I notice, and I love talking to somebody that actually notices the same thing because I don't run into them people very often.
Absolutely. And I think that's not a lot of people are going to notice it. Like you said, you don't run into those people all that often. Right. But when you do, and then you notice that one thing, you can't unsee it.
Right.
Right. It's like burned into your brain. So, and I think that, Linux is great in the server market. People say the year of the Linux desktop, or as it arrived, it's here. It's already here. Like, we're already in it, people. And 10 years from now, we'll notice that we're already in it. And I think what's happening now is we've done so much work on the server side, and we polished the server side up so much that now it's time to move over into the desktop. So I think within the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot of work done on the Linux desktop to really make it a premier product and stand up. So we're going to have Elementary's doing a great job now, but everyone is going to jump on board and is going to be doing a lot of work for that. And, in the episode of LUP that we recorded this week, I kind of even gave a dig to the Fedora guys that after I set up my installation, once my installation's set up, and I log back in and I have to set up my user account, I'm greeted with a screen that says, "Welcome to Fedora." And that's it. And then you have to click a next button, which that's cool. But if you're going to do that, why don't you give me a little bit more information other than just "welcome to" and your Fedora logo? Like, these are the processes of getting set up. Click here to create your user, right? Like you want to give someone that experience, and you want to make it as user friendly as possible, but it's kind of moot to have a screen that you just have to click next on to get to the next part of. It's like the early 90s, right? Whenever you would go to a web page and they would be like, here's welcome, click here to enter.
Yes.
There's a reason we don't do that anymore, right? It basically drives people away from your site. So I think it's important that we take some of these things and we recognize them and we call them out so that we can make them better for everyone else.
I think that is absolutely awesome, because these are the things that I notice when I boot up into a distro, and I'll be like, why did they do that? You know, like, and it's something small that nobody ever notices. And, well, oh well.
Well, and on that same vein with the Mate guys, you know, they have their welcome screen, and a lot of distros are doing this now where they'll have a welcome window pop up, but they give you some good documentation there, and they give you an easy interface to click through to change your desktop, change the theme. Here's how to get more help on this. So I think that can be useful, and there are definitely useful implementations of that, because one of the biggest hurdles with Linux is learning it. It's just like learning, if you've never sat down in front of Windows, you're not going to know how to operate Windows. And the same goes for a Linux environment. So the easier that we can make it for people, and the more documentation that we can provide for them right out of the gate, making that experience better for them, is going to be a win-win for the Linux desktop.
Yep. I love the Mate welcome screen. I also love the Budgie welcome screen. Mm-hmm. And these are ones that, you know, for the longest time, like things like Linux Mint would have a welcome screen, but it was just like a link to the forums or a link to wherever. And it wasn't interactive at all. And I love the fact that you are asked, hey, which theme do you want to use out of this, right before you get into anything. And I think that's kind of what we need to make the experience better for people to want to use it. But let me ask you a question. What do you think about the fragmentation concept in Linux nowadays? Do we need one desktop, one distro to be at the forefront to say this is what Linux is? Or are we okay with all of these thousands of distros?
You know, I think that there's twofold. So it is a little daunting, I think, for a new user whenever they're coming into Linux, like, what do I choose? Where do I go? But I think if we stop doing that, then we really stifle innovation, right? So we're not going to make that cool Minority Report UI, right? That's not going to happen if we say, sorry guys, all we got is XFCE, right? Like, we're going to have to move past that point to understand that it is important that we continue developing all these desktop environments, because something really good is going to come out of that. Even if it's taking this piece from this environment and this piece from another environment and merging them together to make a new one. And, you know, not to keep going back to elementary, but the one thing that I appreciate about those guys, they do it all themselves.
Yep.
Right. They don't, I mean, yeah, it's a big GTK stack that a lot of it sits on top of, but it's like, you know, guys, well, we could use Thunar. No, let's just write our own. Right. And so I appreciate that about them, because they've really dialed in what they want and what they think the experience should be. And I think if we stopped doing that, then we would really stifle innovation when it comes to the Linux desktop.
Well, and you notice all of the desktop environments kind of step along with each other, where, you know, one sees this one's doing that, and then they implement it in some way. And that is the innovation we need. I think we're just at a point where we're early. Even though Linux has been around for a while, I think we're early in the development of what all our desktops should be able to do, where we're just kind of learning, hey, put this in. We shouldn't do that. We should put this in. And I think at some point we're going to get there, to the point where anybody, well, I think we're already there, to be honest with you, that anybody could use a desktop. I could give elementary to anybody and they could use that.
Absolutely.
There's no question about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. There's a big question about, and we touched on it earlier about evangelizing, but there's a big question right now going around about Linux being bad at marketing. And I tend to believe we are bad at marketing, but marketing's not always a friendly word because that can come with bad connotations as far as misrepresent things and lies and stuff like that. But do you think that we need to market Linux?
It's kind of a tough one. I think that we already have marketed Linux to some extent, right? And there's some really good people out there that are doing a lot of great work. Obviously Red Hat is doing some great work with what they do. SUSE is doing some great work with what they do, even though I think that they could spend their money on not making music videos and other things. But they're still doing great work, right? They're still getting their name out there. I think Ubuntu's doing that by even just giving out disk back in the day. Like that left a lasting impression on me that I'll never forget about how they do that. But we also can't expect some of these younger distributions to be good at it, right? Because if you think about the person or the teams that are putting these distributions together, they're not doing it because they want to market it. They're doing it because that's their passion and that's what they want to do. That's what they love to do. So really the last thing they're thinking about is the best way to market Puppy Linux, right? It's not something that they really even care about. Doesn't mean that Puppy Linux doesn't have its uses, and it absolutely does. And I've used Puppy Linux before. It's a great little distro to put on a flash drive, right?
Right.
So, overall, we could maybe do a little better. I think the big players in the Linux and open source world have done a good job of marketing themselves. And I think as distributions grow, they get better at marketing, but you can't expect them to be great at marketing themselves when that's not their key focus, right? Their key focus is to develop this Linux distribution and this product for us all to use and not necessarily market it to us, right? Not put it up on a billboard or on the side of a truck as it passes by or anything like that. So I think we have to find that line. And I think as distributions grow, they are able to bring people into the fold that can help them market their distribution and help make it, one of those things that everybody wants to at least, give it a try. And I think that you can see that with Manjaro and their recent move,
Yep.
what they're doing. So, but they've generally been pretty good at what they do. They show up to all these conferences. I'm super jealous because they're the guys that have the Pine Phone dev kits and the Pine Book dev kits and all these things, and they're already running Manjaro. And I'm like, man, that's like the nerd part of me resonates with that. And I'm like, God, I just want to be there at one of these conferences and just pick your brain about all of this stuff. And I've also heard that Twitter isn't a good avenue to market. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think you find more Linux users are prone to be on Twitter and Mastodon and those sorts of outlets than maybe they are Facebook or anywhere else. So, I think that just getting the word out about your distribution isn't necessarily marketing your distribution. It's just sharing where you are and what your distribution can do for them. And as those distros get bigger, they have more opportunity to market. They pair with a hardware vendor. That hardware vendor starts to help them market. And so overall, I don't think we're bad at it. I think that marketing for Linux is just absolutely different than marketing a soda pop or something, right? It's not the same beast. And so we just have to rely on the growth of the distro and the popularity of the distro to get us to the point where it's worth marketing.
Well, you said getting the word out and about Twitter and stuff, but I don't consider Twitter a bad place because that's what you're actually doing. You're getting the word out in every possible avenue that you can. So I don't downplay any spot for somebody to say, oh, well, you shouldn't be advertising there. You should be marketing there. I mean, anywhere is a good spot to tell people about what you're doing.
Well, I would say that is true, except for direct mail.
Well,
No one ever wants to market their Linux distro through direct mail. I mean, if you want to just fill a 55-gallon drum up with $100 bills and light it on fire, that's what you're doing with direct mail. Because when you get that junk mail, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, there's a 90% chance that you're going to throw it right in the dumpster.
You know,
right? And in general, like you might get 1 to 2% return on that direct marketing mail piece, but it's generally under 1%. So there are some avenues that you definitely don't want to send people down, that people can easily be talked into trying to market in that direction. But for Linux, it's really a digital platform, and so I think marketing, through Twitter and kind of, and like you said, just it's about getting the word out, even if you only have a couple hundred followers or whatever, right? Like it's about getting the word out, and then once that one tweet gets picked up by somebody else, and then it's carried further, and that kind of it's almost like a digital word of mouth these days.
Right. Yep. So, have you ever walked into like Best Buy and showed one of the associates about Linux or wanted to install Linux on the computers?
I may have installed Linux on a computer in a Best Buy before. I've heard this question being asked on Spotlight before, and every time I think, yeah, I've actually been that guy.
Wow. So how did you carve out the time to install the distro without having one of the associates coming up saying, "Hey, can I help you with something?"
Well, it helps when your friends are the associates.
Oh, okay. All right.
Right. So one of my good friends, Alan, he worked there and he worked in the computer department, and I brought Ubuntu on a disk and we started talking about it, and I threw it in and booted it up live CD.
I love it.
And just installed it. Now, of course, wireless didn't work, and like a bunch of stuff was broke, right? I couldn't pull down the Synaptics driver even to get the trackpad to work or something like that at the time. But yeah, I've been that guy. I've done that before. He immediately just nuked it and went into recovery mode and wiped it all out after I walked out of the store. But I've been that guy.
All right. So I will usually say that community is the best reason to run Linux, but you have other reasons like, open source software, customization, flexibility. What drives your passion for running Linux?
I generally, it's a mix. It's a mix of exploration and learning new things. I continuously want to be that guy that just, learns the latest and greatest thing. And then the community as it is now, and it's gotten so much better over the years. And you and I have had conversations about this too, that it's a lot more open. We're getting a lot of new faces and new people into the fold. And so it really is, it has a lot to do with the community and where we've all grown together. So yeah, using Linux is great. Tinkering with it is great. Spending 8 hours setting up your desktop to make it exactly how you want, I love that.
And then nuking it.
And then nuking it like a week later, right? Like I love that. So the exploration, the tinkering, I think if you have that in your blood, then you're just going to be a natural shoe-in for Linux. And then our community has gotten to the point now where we have so many different avenues. We have things like the Arch Wiki. So, even if you're looking for a solution for a problem under Ubuntu, like the Arch Wiki has become a place that you can really turn to. And you have a lot of good outlets. You've got these now with Telegram, and the JB Telegram and the Biddle Telegram, all day long, I see people asking questions and people trying to give them solutions to their problems, or trying to help them out of a bind that they may have gotten themselves into. So I do appreciate the community. I think most of all, what we've grown into, I think we still have some growing to do. I think that we're getting to the point where, we're starting to realize things and the way that certain people are treated, whether that be your sexual orientation, the color of your skin, if you're a male or a female, or any of those things. We've really started to break down those walls and really accept everyone, and I think that is really going to make us a well-rounded project that everyone will eventually want to be involved in.
Yep. And we came from years of bad reputations and everything.
Absolutely.
And there are still those people hanging around. They're much far and few in between than they were. But there still are those people that will, you see the trolls all the time.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not something that we should be concentrating on. We should be concentrating on what we can make better and what we can do to make the experience better for everybody and every new user out there, rather than concentrate on the trolls who just want to be trolls.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that you see that a lot of these people that have previously been trolls or been trolling for years are slowly changing themselves to be more accepting, to actually offer, help to others. So I think that with the shift, you start to take even some of these people that have been using for Linux forever and have notably been trolls. You're starting to break them a little bit, right? And you're starting to bring them back into the fold as better community members. And if we can all just begin to grow like that and understand that we don't have to be that troll that we've been for 10 or 15 years, right? We can actually be a contributing member to the community. I think the more people that we bring on, the more open that we make ourselves, it starts to break down even those hardline trolls, become contributing members to the Linux and open source community.
Yep. I think that the biggest obstacle we face still yet in that area is not just tribalism, but the idea that my community is better than your community. Like before, there were walls up, between, there was like the JB community and then there was this community, and it shouldn't be that way. We're all Linux users. We all have the main thing that we talk about in common. And there should be no, that's your community, that's my community, this is your community, and that should all go away. And I think we're making great strides in that because there's so much collaboration nowadays. Whether that be desktop environments collaborating, whether that be podcasters collaborating or YouTubers collaborating, I think it's awesome. We just got a long ways to go yet.
Yeah, I think we definitely have a long way to go, but we've definitely made leaps and bounds to where we were. And that's part of what I do there at Jupiter Broadcasting and Linux Academy, is to really cross that divide, right? Like, and just as you said, we're all in it for the same reasons. We're all here talking about Linux. I'm on this show talking about Linux, and to be able to break all of that down, to understand that we're here for one common goal and one common reason, one common likeness, it's going to make us all better. And so I strive every day to, if someone is in the Biddle community and asking a question and I can help out, I'll be happy to help out. If it's the JB community and someone's asking a question, of course I'll be there to help out wherever I can. If somebody joins the Biddle community, I'm more than happy to say, hey, welcome, glad to have you here. Just as I would expect if someone was to join the JB community and I wasn't there to open arm and welcome them.
Yeah.
It is different. And I think that sometimes you see some of these newer onboarding of these other shows and stuff that still kind of can create ripples and rifts between communities. But I think that can all be worked on. And I think that with time, they'll understand the importance of everyone coming together kind of under one umbrella and to preach the gospel of Linux and open source.
All right, so let's think of something much happier.
Okay, let's do it.
Linux conferences.
Oh yeah.
So you've been to quite a few, right?
Yeah, I've been to a few. Yeah.
Okay. So do you have a favorite out of all the Linux conferences out there?
Man, I would probably say Linux Fest Northwest. Um, because that's really, I mean, I'd gone to Texas Linux Fest. I love Texas Linux Fest. Always great food. We're always getting like killer barbecue, and it's here in my own backyard. So it's really, it's not an issue for me to just drive there and attend these conferences. And I like Texas Linux Fest because it is smaller. So you do have a lot more intimate time to speak with people, um, and go and do lunch with them in the middle of the day, when everybody's taking a lunch break and those sorts of things. But within my first month, I'd gone to, my first month at Linux Academy, I'd gone to Linux Fest Northwest, which I had purchased my ticket for that right before I'd gotten hired on at Linux Academy. So I'd planned to go out of my own pocket anyway. And then within that same month, I was, there at Linux Fest Northwest, which is Bellingham, right near Seattle. And then within that same month, I was over in Boston at Red Hat Summit, um, which is where you definitely notice the corporate side of Linux and open source, and the solutions that they're providing to these Fortune 500 companies. And it's a different environment. Um, it's a lot bigger. And so you don't really have those intimate conversations. Um, it's kind of off putting, but you have to find the people to talk to. So there was a group, and I cannot remember the name of the group, but they had built this really cool um, installation where you could pick up a phone. And it was like, kids these days don't even know what rotary phones are, touchstone
Right.
phones are. But you could pick up this phone, and it would begin to give you basically a little history lesson on Red Hat and where it started. And it was different, uh, people, executives from Red Hat talking about Red Hat. And um, I started talking to the team that developed this art installation, because that's really kind of the way that I saw it. And I'm like, dude, what? So I get it. This is awesome. How are you doing it? And he's like, oh yeah, dude, well, we're doing it with a teensy microcontroller. And I was like, super cool. And he's like, do you want to see it? And I was like, absolutely. So here he is, like unscrewing this giant metal panel on this art installation just to show me the inside and the brain and the microcontroller and the PCB that he developed for delivering power, so that the phones wouldn't have a lot of ground loop noise and stuff in them. So and like I just nerded out with that guy for like half an hour, and he was proud to show me what he had created, and I was equally as enthralled to see what he had created. So I think you have to, while I do appreciate the smaller conferences, I think that you have to, um, give every conference a shot. And whichever one you go to, you're going to find like-minded people there. I would encourage you to go to the smaller one if you want that kind of intimate experience again. But um, it's really what you make of it, and it's really how you step into it. So you step into it thinking it's just going to be a corporate only event. Well, that's all you're really going to get out of it.
Right.
So I would encourage anyone, if they're on the fence about going to one of these conferences, you definitely need to get out there. Yeah, I mean, you can have fun chatting behind a terminal with your friends, and but whenever you get to actually meet them face to face and share a meal with them or buy them a beer or whatever, it really changes the dynamic, and you go back with a newfound respect for that person and what they do. And so I think overall, it's really an opportunity for any Linux user to really understand their community and even be more a part of their community by going to these conferences.
I would totally agree. Self was the first one I ever went to this past year, and it was absolutely awesome. And I would recommend it to anybody in the Linux community. If you have one, even if it's a smaller one in your area, just go to it. At some point, I'd like to, see other conferences like Linux Fest Northwest and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, just to meet the people that you talk to every day, give them, shake their hand, give them a hug, whatever it may be. I mean, me and Zeb were down at Southeast Linux Fest, and I met all kinds of guys that I talked to, like Ryan and Michael and everything. But me and Zeb basically spent the weekend together, sitting down in the hotel, drinking coffee, just talking.
Yeah.
And we could switch conversations from the weather to, hard drives to terminals and not even skip a beat. It was awesome.
And I think that everyone would gain something from that if they just took that opportunity. And if you're on the fence about, oh, I'm so awkward, I'm different, don't feel that you're going to be out of place at one of these conferences, because you absolutely won't be. Everyone that I've run into has been, very open armed and just, it tries to embrace those people that come to these sort of events. And I try to make it a point, if I'm at one of these events and I see somebody that's maybe standing on the outside of the circle and not really being involved in the conversation, I try to bring the conversation to them. I try to rope them into that and not make them feel like they're an outsider to everything that's going on. So
Right.
I definitely want to hit up Southeast Linux Fest next year. Texas Linux Fest is on my schedule. Linux Fest Northwest is on my schedule. So there's going to be a few that I'm going to. I'm really excited about.
Yep, I agree. I haven't made any specific plans to be at Self this year, but I would love to be there. So, well, dude, we talked about the reputation that Linux has and some of the things that people have said. But on a whole, how has your experience been with the community?
Like I said, in the early days, it wasn't great. But as I've grown into Linux and I begin to understand Linux more, it's gotten a lot better. And I feel that, even if I can just give one person a tip on maybe trying this out, or I can help them solve one problem that they have, I feel that I'm doing my part. I'm also very much that guy that would rather give a gift than receive a gift. So, I feel like just being out there and helping out and trying to do your piece where you can is really what makes the community better. And in the early days, you didn't see that. You were put down for being dumb, that you just don't understand it. Whereas now, you might get ribbed for being dumb for doing something that way, right? But that same person is going to be like, no, dude, you shouldn't do it this way unless you want your box owned. But let me tell you, this is the way you should do it. So it's really kind of flipped and given people a place that they can feel comfortable to come in and learn something, learn an operating system, or learn a piece of software that they may have never even knew that existed. So community is a lot better. The community is really a place that I appreciate. I appreciate all the walks of life that we get in our community. As I spoke on earlier, I mean, I've met people that do engineering work, right? Our friend Nate is a great engineering.
Yeah.
As a great engineer. And I've met some guys that do satellite work that take photos of the Earth, and that's super cool, man. Yep. And they're coordinating all the back end of this through Linux. Like, that's just blows my mind. I love it. So the community is one that it's a lot better than it was, and it's an opportunity to meet a lot of really interesting people. And it's definitely one of those places that you can't judge a book by its cover. So you never know who you're talking to in the community and what they do. Right. And a lot of times they're some of the coolest people. And a lot of times they would never even tell you what they do, but they're some of the coolest people that you will ever meet.
Yep. Well, the Linux community itself has a lot of people with talent. But there are a lot of people in the Linux community that feel that they don't have any talents. They want to help out somewhere, but they don't know how. They don't know where. They don't know how to contribute something in a meaningful way. So what would you say to somebody? What is the best way maybe to get involved in Linux to contribute?
Find whatever it is that you are good at, right? If you're good at writing, documentation, like we spoke on earlier, there's always a place for good documentation. In my case, I did graphic work, and so that's where I felt that I could pitch in. There's always something that you can do. There, you can be a beta tester, right? You can be the guy that goes over to Wimpy and you're like, hey, let me join the Mate project and test out the latest betas and give you feedback on them. So, and that feedback is taken to heart. People might think that it's not, but people do appreciate that, especially as we spoke earlier on the different little nuances and different little tiny things that could be wrong that they would have just skimmed over. So there's always a place for someone in the community to contribute. And it's just really finding what you're good at, what you're passionate about. If you have a favorite distribution that you just love to death, then talk to them and say, hey, what can I do? Where can I help out? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, hey, we could really use help on this. Well, I'm not really good at that. Okay, well, how about doing this? And so, you can find something to do. And I encourage anyone out there that they should really try to contribute back where they can, whatever that may be, even if that's just being someone that they can chat with and help troubleshoot a problem.
Yep.
You can always give back. So don't feel like there is no way for you to give back, because there always is.
Yep. Everybody has something to offer. Everybody.
Absolutely.
Well, you mentioned it earlier about the year of the Linux desktop. Is this just a meme now, dude?
I feel like it is. I feel like it really is. And I say that because, again, Linux is everywhere. My Dodge Ram pickup runs QNX, and it's sad, but like the animations are served up in Flash. Because of course, whenever I downloaded the update, it's an image, and then I can mount that image and then start dissecting and looking at it. But a bunch of stuff is compiled into a bin that you would have to hex edit if you really wanted to do anything fun. But everything runs Linux. I mean, there's so much stuff out there that runs Linux. What do we consider a desktop? Is a desktop something that has to have a mouse, right? Is a desktop something that's just you touch with your finger, like an infotainment center in your vehicle? Well, I mean, I think we have to define what is a Linux desktop to some extent. But I think we're already in it. We're already here. I think that it could, we can always make it better. And I think that we are working on beautifying and creating a better UI and UX for these distributions. And again, like I said earlier, I think that within 5 or 10 years that this is going to be the next big leap for Linux on the desktop, is to really, beautify these desktops to make it something where somebody's like, that looks really cool, much cooler than Windows.
Yep.
I want to use that. And we will get there. But yeah, I think it's a meme, dude. I mean, people are gonna. At what point do we even like denote and put the flag in the ground that this is the year of the Linux desktop? I really don't know. I mean, whenever we get Linux on a computer that's in Best Buy? I mean, they're already on computers on Dell's site, right? So, and Dell's, put a lot of work into that. System 76 has built a company around that. Yep. So, I think I think we will see wider acceptance in Linux. And we've got Chromebooks, and whether you love them or hate them, there's a kernel down there, guys. So, it's there, and it's going to become bigger and bigger, but it's going to take a little time, before we see your Acer laptop running the latest version of Manjaro or something like that.
Well, I think we in the Linux world have had the stigma of Linux, of old Linux, where it was, hard to install, nothing worked, We had that stigma for so long. It's going to take us a while. We look at distributions today, and they're absolutely beautiful. I mean, even down to Ubuntu but you have Pop! OS, you have Elementary, you have Zorin, you have all of these distros that you could hand to somebody, and they would be intrigued by it. They would want to try that distribution. And I think we will get there. It's just that we have to continue on, not promoting, but continue on showing off the best of what Linux has to offer because of the stigma we've had for so long.
Absolutely. Well, in my 2015 MacBook Pro that I had purchased before I started there at Linux Academy, mainly because I wanted to use a different environment to do graphic design work on. And so I purchased that one myself, the only piece of Apple equipment I've ever purchased. Whenever I got my MacBook from Linux Academy for my day job, my old MacBook has since been reloaded to Pop! OS and runs Pop! Full time now. And I just updated to 1910 on it. I love it. It does exactly what I need it to do. And, I couldn't be happier with it. All of the function keys work. And that was another thing. Whenever you were putting Linux on laptops back in the day, that was a big struggle. It was getting the volume up and down keys to work. Dear God, and we're finally getting to that point where, with Pop! OS, for example, it just works, man. I don't have to fiddle with it, and I can jump right in and get to work doing whatever I need my Linux machine to do.
Well, since I purchased this machine back, I don't know, it was early in the year, it's been running Pop! OS, and it's absolutely amazing, and I love it. And the new 1910 has come out, and they introduced so many little refinements to the theme that it is absolutely amazing.
Exactly. And they're really dialing it in. They're really doing a great job with that. And even just the update experience, right, was for me, the little pop down, hey, there's a new version available. Click on it, pulls down my files. Okay, we're going to need a restart to install everything. Boom, it restarts, gives me my little progress bar that everything's being set up again. Log back in, zero problems. Like there's not one thing that I had to go back and fix or adjust. Right. And like you said, just the tweaks on the theme and what they're doing there, I think they're really dialing it in. And as they should be, if they're pairing it with hardware, you want to give someone the best user experience possible. And I think that they work really hard to do that, and it shows.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing. It's, they do have their own hardware that they pair it with, but yet it still runs on any hardware that you could put it on, which is awesome, because that's not always the case. If somebody's directly putting it on hardware for their machine, they're going to tweak it for that machine, instead of where you could download Pop's ISO and it can work on any machine.
Well, yeah, I think that they're doing a great community service, and like we spoke about at the very top of the show, with Linux Academy, I feel the same exact way about what Linux Academy has done for JB to help us, do what we do even better. Pop is doing, or System 76 is doing with Pop! OS. And it's great to see companies like this step out and, be a little vulnerable to kind of take that leap of faith. And of course, whenever Pop, everybody was like, oh, this is just going to be another Ubuntu spin, right? Like, oh, here's another one. But they've really done a great job dialing it in to where it is today, and Cassidy, who previously worked for System 76 on Pop! OS, is now one of the guys that's doing Elementary, one of the founders of Elementary. So, you never know how these things are going to splinter off and to create other projects, to create things that are amazing for our community. So I love seeing companies step up to the plate and actually do the work to give the work away. I think really says something about that company.
Yep. It's an amazing part of the community. So if you could change one thing about Linux, what would it be?
It's kind of a tough one, man, because I really don't know. Better documentation. If distros today would, if not ship provide the ability to buy a book, I would love that, because you and I here are, first world. We're talking over the internet. We're having a conversation, which is going to be released. There are a
Right.
lot of people that aren't as fortunate as us, right? That if you're, sitting in a country where you don't have internet access, but you want to learn, I think documentation is crucial for that. And it's kind of sad to see that the only distribution left doing that is SUSE. And the only manual that you can get is in German. So it really doesn't work for me much, but I do appreciate that they're still doing it. And recently, like you guys have done on Biddle with Endless, a lot of people say, well, why would you ever download 900 gigabytes to put on a, well, because there are a lot of people that aren't as fortunate as us, that that information is very valuable to them.
Yep.
No, I'm probably never going to use it to learn about farming beets, right? But someone else might. And it's always a good little distribution to have in your back pocket. And I still have Endless on a flash drive, because you never know what's going to hit, right? I mean, it could be a solar flare, right? And then we're all thrust back into the dark ages,
Right.
and there's a couple of computers left working, or people have hobbled some stuff together, and you want to use that machine for information, not for just computing. So I think that there's always a place for that. The documentation has gotten a lot better than it was. But if we could get physical Linux manuals back, I would absolutely love that.
I would love to see that. And I think that would also be a way that could be a form of not just marketing, but for if distributions would put that out. And even if they would say, here's a donate button, or even here, buy this, I would surely buy it. I don't need it, but it would be a way to contribute to that distro, to give back to something that you maybe are not going to do in some other way. And you can also then hand that to somebody and say, here, learn about it. But, you had mentioned about the internet and people not so fortunate. I have had so many comments on Biddle after the Endless OS challenge about people who make comments like, yes, but you have internet, yes, but you have fast internet, where in other countries, it's not the same. And they don't have the availability that we have here in the US, not just for internet, but for actual computers and whatnot. So
right.
The computers that they're able to get are not high-powered machines. They can't run, these big operating systems. So they need Linux, but they also want to learn about it. And it's not the easiest thing to do in their situations. I've had so many comments like that in the last few weeks. It's funny you mention it.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's extremely important that we aren't so closed off that we don't think about others, that, maybe there's some kid that wants to write a program or wants to write a game, right? That doesn't know where to start because he doesn't have an internet connection, right? I'm trying to figure out a way to make an automated pump with a Raspberry Pi and some GPIO pins so that my village can have fresh drinking water, right? And there's no way for him to know how to do that without having an internet connection, or without
Right.
having someone guide him to get to that point, him or her, I should say, to get to that point. So it's very important that we're not so closed off, that and so just absorbed in our own worlds, that we don't think about others.
Right. All right, man. Is there anything else you'd like to share with people?
Be good to each other. Don't hate on each other, because that's really not going to do anything for anyone. I would like you to listen to the JupiterBroadcasting.com shows. That helps keep my lights on. If anyone, from this interview or any of the topics that I talk about on any of the shows, if anyone has any questions for me, I'm a very approachable guy. Please don't come to me and say, oh, I'm talking to a celebrity. That's one of the things that I hate the most. So come to me as just another human, and let's just have a conversation. Don't put me on a pedestal, because I certainly don't put myself on one. And, I think we'd all be better if we didn't put ourselves on pedestals, just in general.
Agreed.
If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can. It's chzbacon.
Is that the best place to get a hold of you?
Yeah, that's generally the best place to get a hold of me. You can ping me there, or if you're on Telegram, I'm generally always on Telegram. I've kind of moved away from IRC. I still jump on IRC, but it's not as thriving as it once was. Because now everybody has a little computer in their pocket, so it's just easier with Telegram to get connected that way. So yeah, if you have any questions for me, if you just want to pick my brains, if you just want to have a conversation, feel free to reach out to me. I'm very approachable. I'll be happy to help you out any way that I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cheese, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, man. It's been a great conversation. I feel like even if we weren't separated by webcams here, we'd still be able to sit down and just have this casual conversation. And I appreciate that, and appreciate what you do. And, it's really insightful to bring everybody on. And I think that one thing that, seems to be an ongoing piece with the Linux Spotlight is how passionate everybody is, and how much we really all align when it comes, down to it, and how much we all have a lot of the same philosophies and the same ideals. And so I say, let's take that forward and spread the good word, man.
Well, I think that is one of the best things about it, because sometimes when you're in, anywhere, you can feel like you're the only one that feels this way, or you're the only person that is experiencing this. And through talking to all of these different people, you realize all of these people have experienced some of the bad things in Linux, some of the awesome things in Linux. And you see people, and I'm going to point out, you see people like Jill Bryant, who have such a passion for Linux and such a positive attitude that it's like infectious. And Absolutely. It's awesome to meet these people like yourself. It's awesome to meet guys like you who want to make the community better. Like, I could myself want to make the community better, but when you see other people doing the same exact thing, it's a great feeling. So I appreciate it, man.
Well, thank you, man. And I will say that I do love Jill. Jill is just so sweet, and we could all learn a lot from Jill. We really all could. And big shout out to Chris and what he's done over the years to get us where we are, to where I am now in my professional career, and slogging through all of the hate and all of the, if you think that we've dealt with it, I can tell you that guy has been beat up and cut down so many times that he's got iron skin now, that's for sure.
Well, someday maybe he'll come on here and talk about it.
Oh, I'm sure that he will.
Well, thanks again, man.
For sure.
Thank you all for joining us this week as we spotlight the best thing about Linux, our community. Until next time, long live Linux. Recording just to make sure our levels are equal. So go ahead, say something.
Hello, Rocco. This is chzbacon. I like your gnome on the shelf. I'm curious what it says on the sign, though. Is that good?
Recording is starting. Counter's going up. That's a plus. I love it.
You have disk space.
I have 100 gigabytes of disk space. We should be fine. I don't think you can talk that long.
No.
That's a bet.
No. Don't believe that I can. I know some people that could. Not me.
I'm sure you do.